I will call this meeting to order since my gavel didn't make the move. Using my knuckles here. A roll call by the county clerk.
We have 30 present and 0 absent.
Thank you. Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Roberts, could you lead us tonight?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Take a moment to contemplate the fact that many of you this is the 4th place you've been holding meetings in the last 3 years, so appreciate the new dates. Thank you. Please be seated. I have, we're in compliance with the open meetings law.
We're in compliance, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ben. Approval of the agenda. I'm suggesting one addition to the agenda here under communications, item D, retirement recognitions. With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda. So moved by Mr. Backlund. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Jakel. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. The agenda is approved. Approval of minutes. Supervisor Winnicke.
I would move the approval of the minutes of September 12th, 2023 as submitted.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Morris. Anybody see any additions, subtractions? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Communications.
There is a public hearing for planning and zoning on October 19th, 2023 at 7 p.m. And then you should find a report from the Lake Ripley Management District from Meg Turville Heights. And then you will also find the treasurer's report on an orangish yellow piece of paper. And that is it.
Thank you. Retirement recognitions. There she is. Terry. Thank you.
It's going to make a grand entrance to this story. Good evening, everyone. Most of the time when I get up here, I have a list of retirees for you, and this time I only have 2, but the 2 of them added together had over 75 years with us at Jefferson County. The first is Joy Clark. She retired the second time from Jefferson County very recently after spending 12 years at Human Services as a nutrition site manager the entire time in the city of Jefferson. Prior to that, she worked a couple of different positions at the courthouse, and when she retired the first time, left here as our central duplicating clerk. So unfortunately, I don't think she was able to make it tonight, but we will certainly get her her plaque and certificate. And with that, I'd like to ask Brent to come up from Human Services for our second retiree.
Good evening. It's my pleasure as Human Services Director to say a few words about Wendy Pettit. Wendy Pettit started at Jefferson County in July of 1995. She worked there 28 years. Wendy was there when I arrived at Jefferson County Human Services, and she always greeted everybody with a smile on her face. She was always extremely engaging. She started her career handling cases in our youth justice area as well as child protective services. Wendy had many children in foster care. She spent many hours testifying in our courtrooms down the hall. From there, she moved on serving adults with disabilities until managed care came in, and then she pivoted and had a wonderful career in our ADRC as a resource specialist. She worked in adult protective services, protecting our elderly population, and finished her career in administration there in the ADRC. So really, really proud to have worked with Wendy, and a big thank you to her for all of her years.
small token of our thanks as well. And if you had a few words you wanted to say, you're welcome to step up to the podium.
I didn't expect to be saying anything, but I guess when you work at Human Services, I can say that unfortunately you're seeing people at their worst moments, not ever at their best moments, but I've been honored for 28 years to have the people of Jefferson trust me in their worst moments and to open up to me and to share their stories with me and to allow me to be a part of their story. It was a hard job, but it was an honor. It was an honor to be a part of this community. It was an honor to work with people like Terry and Brent. I've met wonderful people along the way. The people who work for this county are amazing people. They do a hard job day in and day out. Sometimes it's a thankless job, but they are amazing people. And I thank this community for making me a part of the community and allowing me to be a part of their story. Thank you.
Thank you. That moves us on to public comment. Former Supervisor Laura Payne.
Do I have to give you my address? Hello, my name is Laura Payne. My address is N4377 Beach Drive in the town of Oakland. As was mentioned, I am a former county board supervisor. I was on this board until the past term, and I'm very happy to see that you're addressing the stormwater and erosion control problems that we face in Jefferson County. I have been suggesting this for quite a while, so I'm glad that it's being done. However, I do feel that there are a lot of ways to improve these ordinances. I'm just going to talk about one, just for time's sake. But to start with, I am an environmental engineer. I've specialized in stormwater management for about 25 years. So I'm quite familiar. I've worked on very large industrial projects for clients in many states, within many counties. So I feel like I have a lot of experience on this matter. I see a lot of ways to improve, but the most critical I feel today to discuss is in the stormwater ordinance proposed tonight. In Section 11, Performance Standards, Part 4 Requirements, Section B, Peak Discharge. So in it, it states that for a new development, they need to be able to hold back the equivalent of a 2-year storm to enough that the pre-construction conditions is met. So whatever runoff you have during a 2-year storm before development, you have to meet that post-development. And I just feel that that is not sufficient. We are living in a county that has a lot of flooding problems. It floods on the Rock River and other rivers throughout the county. And just to analyze and to develop a stormwater management system for a 2-year storm just doesn't seem sufficient. In my opinion, you need to be able to design for a 25-year storm at the very least. Rock County, as you know, Rock River continues on to Rock County. They have a lot of flooding, and their stormwater ordinance requires that you develop a stormwater management plan to minimize flooding for a 100-year storm event. So I feel that even though progress is being made, that this just is really not enough to prevent the flooding on our rivers and lakes. And even for our stormwater sewer systems, that we need as we develop to hold back some additional runoff. So I am proposing that you discuss this requirement, really go over this plan in depth. I just got this recently, so I wasn't able to make comments before now, but, I suggest going back to committee, discussing this further, and really deciding the best ways to minimize flooding in our county as we develop and what the requirements should be for new development. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Mr. Chair, I have a
Yes,
public comment.
Mr. Johns.
Public comment?
Is it on the agenda? Or on the-
No, it's for the clean sweep.
Well, then that goes at the end.
Okay.
Supervisor Martin has one for the end too for comments. So. Okay, takes us to special order of business, presentation of the fiscal year 2024 operating and capital budget. Mr. Waymeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the board members have several documents in front of you tonight. First is obviously the larger budget book. You also have copies of the presentation we're going to go through tonight. Again, we try to page annotate what the presentation is so you can go back to the budget book to cross-reference that as we go forward. We're going to try to move through some of this really quick. I think as I talked to Mark, the challenge I have every year is how do you take a full week of finance committee hearings? How do you take a 2-hour budget presentation and a lot of other work staff put together and try to get it down to a reasonable amount of presentation for you all tonight of about roughly of a 500-page document. And so we'll work to make sure we get through this quickly. And then obviously we got some time so you can ask questions in the future as you deliberate and look at the public hearing coming up and the final approval coming November 14th. So really quick, these are the goals of things that we're going to talk about tonight. Really talk about some of the thoughts so you can kind of the background. I would specifically ask that you look at the budget message that's in there. Kind of talks about our philosophy and budget development here in Jefferson County and some of our goals and opportunities, but some of our challenges that we have too as we look to the future fiscal years as well. We're going to talk through some of the budget summary, mill rates, the revenues that we're looking at, fund balance application, some of the recommended staffing, the department changes going forward, quick capital overview, how we're starting to implement this with our new strategic plan or draft strategic plan. Staff has gone through already with the tentative strategic plan and updated the goals and outcomes so they align with what the tentative plan is. And then we're going to talk through some of the things that we're seeing for the future and why we're looking at the budget is being recommended the way it is to really have a sound fiscal principle for 2025, 2026, and 2027 too. So I always kind of look at this from a parameter standpoint, a concept standpoint, as we look at this budget, what are some things that we want to talk about? And especially as we undertook the strategic planning process, what are we trying to aim with this policy document to move the resources, get these things done? And what were some of these inputs from the strategic plan to really help frame this message going forward? Example, as I look at the second bullet point, we talked a lot about financial stability and sustainability as we go forward. Is it really get us in that place to move forward? So these are just some things as we prepare this document and as we talk with staff and the finance committee, things that we've talked a lot about. We knew going into 2024, this was going to be a challenging budget year for a variety of reasons. Part of it was just obviously what's going on in the economy outside, inflation, how we deal with our staffing in terms of keeping up with wages, the impacts of health insurance, but also other things that we knew were coming just because of how projects were going within Jefferson County. And you're going to see a little bit about that in our fund balance policy application that we've talked about. We know ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act dollars, are wrapping up in 2024. And how do we plan of unwinding those and looking to the future going forward? We're also looking at, it was a tight timeline this year. I think Mark can tell you, our finance director, that felt every time we took a step forward, we probably took 2, 3, 4 steps back, it felt like at points in times, to try to get a full balanced budget that made fiscal sense. And then also we're going to briefly talk about the impacts of the debt levy. I think you're going to see some numbers that are very positive, both from a mill rate standpoint, but actually from a tax reduction standpoint, and some of the things that you all have done, both in terms of early debt payment, but also as we looked at the structure of the debt for the courthouse project. So about the next 4 slides, we're not going to go line item by line item. I just want to remind you what's in this budget book and the page annotations by everything. This is also in your table of contents, but it really talks through the organizational needs, summary of budget information, all the various departments by fund type, and we also have a glossary. So those who have been around county government a little bit, we're almost worse than the military in terms of the acronyms that we utilize. So if you understand when we say GALs, it's back there, right? So go take a look if you have some questions. We try to spell most of those things out in the budget document, but there's references in the back. So again, we talk about the county profile. We look at the municipal population. We're looking at the changes in the EAV. In general, we had a very strong year, but as you break it down by towns, villages, and city, both in terms of EAVs and net new constructions, there's variances. And that ultimately impacts how that participates in the tax rate for Jefferson County. So kind of understand that and take a look at that. If you have questions how that looks with the tax rates, please let Mark or I know. Every department has a similar budget layout, and I try to remind everyone of this every single year. You'll see every department has their mission, their goals, how it ties to strategic plans, some of their outcomes, factors influencing where they've been and where they're going as a department within our organization, organizational charts, and ultimately all the fiscal. We have some of our department has multiple business divisions, and so you'll see a summary fiscal page at the beginning that wraps everything together. And then we have the nitty-gritty detail behind that. So if you want to go through every business unit with line items, it's in that budget book for you to take a look at. So again, any questions, let us know. We do have, as you will note, continue to show federal grants. That is the American Rescue Plan Act in most departments. So if you're wondering what that is, that's really what it ties back to in general. And then the budget summary, page 78 is probably one of the biggest quick snapshots as we go through this process, and I'll show you this here in a minute, of how our overall budget is developed and where we're at today, both in terms of expenditures, revenues that are coming in, and then ultimately what the property tax looks like. And then there's a variety of other summary pages as well for fiscal analysis. So this is page 78. And if you're having a tough time looking at it, I'd encourage you to kind of look at it. So overall, we're proposing a budget that is over $106 million for fiscal year 2024. This is down roughly about $40 million from last year or this current fiscal year, mainly because this does not include the capital project, i.e. the courthouse, sheriff, jail project going forward. You'll see a note later on when we talk about capital projects. What we do is called construction in progress. So come December 31st, we'll get a report of how much is left of the project in terms of against the budget, and you'll see an updated budget amendment in March of 2024 to close that out. So that's part of the reason why that's down. The estimated revenue is a variety of revenue sources that come into Jefferson County. So a good example is you'll see human services, roughly over $30 million comes in from other sources. This can be from state and federal grants. In the case of human services, we also bill for insurance or Medicare or Badger Care as an example. Those are some of those other revenue sources that come in. Ultimately, we look at the net expenses that come out, potentially other financing resources that go into each department. Then ultimately, in the far right, you look at how we break down the proposed tax levy in general. In general, we're looking at a total tax levy, including the library tax levy and the public health levy of approximately $35.4 million. When we exclude the non-county-wide levy of health department and library, it's approximately $33.285 million. So this chart is the lower part of page 78. And you'll see how we have broken down that countywide levy and the mill rates, and you can see the trends over the last 10 years roughly. You're going to continue to see a great evaluation of EAV. We've added over another $1 billion roughly in EAV related to the total values of properties in Jefferson County. And then you also look at the middle, which is the comparison of countywide tax levy. This is a combination of our general operating levy and debt levy that we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute here. This is not a typo. We went from 33.7 million to 33.285 million. That is an actual reduction that we'll talk through in a minute. Overall, we're seeing roughly 11% reduction in mill rates as well. So this is a chart on page 88 that really explains what is going on between the general operating levy and the debt levy. So the big thing that happened when we talked this minute is we paid the debt off early and we structured the debt for the courthouse. What that did is our general mill, and between our EAV increasing by about $1 billion and our net new construction adding about $388,000 in value, we had some pretty significant changes. So our general mill rate is dropping about 0.24 or down to 2.645. Our debt mill rate dropped 0.1308 down to 0.416. Ultimately, it's a debt reduction or mill rate reduction of 11.03%. So I just kind of want to point out our operational mill rate this year is 3.03. Our total mill rate proposed for 2024 is 3.062. Keep in mind, some of that's a combination of that reduction I talked about, but part of it is also the increase in values. It's a algebra formula too. So the kids in back, you have to use algebra when you get older too and figure out how this all works, okay? One thing this does include when we look at the debt mill rate is we're proposing that you'll see on October 24th is a refinance of the lease for our telephone system. We talked about that a few months ago. We're finding cheaper interest rates, and we can roll that up into the debt, and it kind of helps things through with the total budget. So debt levy impacts. So I mentioned we have about almost a $500,000 in actual reduction in debt levy or total net. The actual reduction in the debt levy is about $841,000 from this current fiscal year. So a lot of that was when we came to you with the big debt issuance last year, we talked a lot about how do we structure it. And part of it is we looked at an opportunity with others to bring some of those costs up towards the front, pay a little bit more upfront initially, and save long-term costs, both from interest and the cost of issuance of that debt. So that's part of the reason why we're seeing that reduction. The other thing is we paid off a debt 10 years old early of over $2 million. We kind of had those savings. We carried those funds forward. We analyzed the debt, recognized that we had a debt from 2013 that was backwards loaded. And I say that had the heaviest interest rates in years 11 through 20. And we had the funds available from a one-time revenue source. And so with the board's approval, we went ahead and paid that off early. So again, that's why you're seeing some of those things are driving down those total costs and that total cost reduction in debt levy. And again, I talked about the lease for the phone system that'll be in front of the county board because it will be a refinancing promissory note obligation of the county. That's what it's going to look like. So it will be part of that debt analysis. And then we have two non-countywide levies. Most of you are familiar with this, but just kind of a refresher. So one of them is for the libraries. We work with our library system, and for those towns and communities that do not have a direct library system, we issue a non-countywide levy. We have a full formula that we've worked out with the library board, and we get reports back. It's really almost like a fee for service is how this formula is set up. So it is a slight reduction of where we were at with a total issuance of $1.19 million in general. The second non-countywide, and that levy is actually outside the tax cap law, just so everyone's aware as we talk through tax cap laws. The second non-countywide mill rate is for our health department. That's on page 89. Very slight reduction in that as we increased our contribution. This does count towards our overall tax cap. So as we move things back and forth, that's part of the analysis we have to go through. This is primarily a non-countywide tax because the city of Watertown has their own health department, and so they are not double taxed for that being provided. For those who do not know, we actually have a partnership with the city of Watertown. We contract with them for environmental health services, so it's actually a nice thing as you look at collaboration that we don't all have environmental workers, we just work with them and how that moves forward. So although it's not countywide, we do have partnerships with the city of Watertown related to that. And then we begin to break down the other main general purpose revenues or GPR that we have coming in. So the big one is sales tax. We're looking at a revenue source of about $8.6 million. We still estimate this to be a pretty conservative number, but we do want to be cautious with that number. That's probably roughly, quite frankly, we're going to end 2023 in. Some estimates would actually take us higher than that. There's a lot of unknowns that we continue to look at. And as I kind of look at Mark, he's doing okay back there right now. But because this is discretionary income, we just want to be very careful of the impacts with that. And obviously, it's being impacted by inflationary impacts, but also increased discretionary spending. If some of these monetary policies change, that could take down that discretionary spending, which could have a direct impact to our sales tax. So that's where we're always a little conservative on that. Overall, countywide, our net new construction is about 1.32%. That was the average in total As I said, as you look through the net new construction from DUR, we have numbers at 0% growth to well over 2.23, 2.4%, depending on which community you're in. That impacts what new revenues can come in because that's what you're allowed to expand to. So for us, that equates to almost $400,000 in revenue streams. And historically, what we have done, and we're doing it once again, is we're applying that towards operational capital to move those items forward. The biggest change that we'll talk a little bit more through is state shared revenue. You'll see roughly an increase from about $1.17 million to $2.1 million, a pretty significant increase based on Act 12. But there's some variations of how we're showing it. In the next slide, we'll talk through that a little bit more. Personal property aid stays flat. We expect that to continue to stay flat and slight increase because we did have a TID adjustment that takes place, or tax increment financing district. State aid and computer exemption, I don't think that has moved since I have been here with a budget. Utility tax, we're showing a slight increase, about $200,000, give or take a little bit. We're getting the analysis as we bring solar farms online, specifically the small solar farm and the liquid natural gas facility in Ixonia. It's not fully operational yet, but there's a formula that takes that forward. We do expect those numbers to be more current with our JDA, or Joint Development Agreement we have in place for both those projects, probably closer to 25 and some are rolling to 2026. Investment income. We talked to the Finance Committee quite a bit about this, and Dana is our financial advisor as we look out to the outcome. There's a couple moving pieces with investment income. One is we have taken our American Rescue Plan Act dollars and have utilized those as investments under the rules that are allowed. Interest and dividends made out of that can go back to our general fund in general. And so what we have developed is a cash flow process when those investments mature, so we have the cash in hand as best as possible. So that's partly what's in there right now. The other thing is most of the things we're allowed to invest in have a direct or indirect correlation to the federal interest rate. So as that federal interest rate has come up, as example, we have a lot of variable rate mortgage in our portfolio. Those go up naturally as those interest rates go up. We do expect there's going to be a slowdown of those federal interest rates, which may change how we look at those stock portfolios or interest coming back down, or at least stabilizing a little bit. So we're moving to 1.5 million, but we want to be very cautious with that number in terms of relying on it being that level or increasing in the future for operational expenditures. And then finally is interest on property tax. So by law, when people are late on their property tax on an annual basis, Kelly can assess from a county treasurer's standpoint 12% by statute, we have to, interest on late property taxes. Now this number is actually a good number to see going down. I think when I first started, this number was over $1 million in interest on property taxes. So I think it's important to understand where that's at, because that also tells you what's going out in the communities right now in terms of the ability to pay, timely pay, and they're not getting hit with interest plus delayed utility payments and all that. So that's a good number that we're seeing go down. So Act 12 is the infamous state shared revenue that was passed before the budget was approved. And you'll see that sharp red line that jumps up. The blue line is our utility tax. And you can see it was really frozen starting around that 2012, 2011 timeframe. And the decrease has been flat all along of roughly that $1.117 million. So those who do not know, about 1% of the total sales tax, or 5% that's assessed at the statewide basis, has been reserved for local governments. And local governments mean the definition of towns, city, villages, and counties. And as that pot grows, there's a formula that's in place that our revenue can grow with it, which is important because, as you can see with that flat line, it has not grown in some time. So as more sales tax comes from a statewide basis, not the county basis, that pot will continue to grow and follow that formula. But there are some restrictions on it. And what was passed in that legislation is specific uses it could be used for. A good example specifically were law enforcement, EMS, fire, highways were examples of what it could be used for. We're going to be expected as an entity to give a report back up to DOR, who has been delegated that responsibility of how those funds are used. And specifically, we're going to have to do what's called maintenance of efforts. We're going to have to demonstrate how those funds are being used from reporting metrics and using data to support that. Those MOEs, or maintenance of efforts, are still being discussed as the rules are beginning. So what you'll see in the budget is our base general revenue, about $1.117 million, is going to continue to be in our general revenue business unit. But what we took is that additional state shared revenue and that's been applied to the sheriff's department, and then we allocated other property tax because we know that is kind of the expectation of how that law was passed, and it's going to help us on the back end from a reporting requirement going forward. So that's really what we did on there. There's also a thing called the Innovation Fund that's out there. It's a $300 million fund on a statewide basis. Rules still need to be written. The intention behind that is to look at opportunities for collaboration with other local governments and kind of that carrot to look at as it goes forward. We've been talking with some of our partners so far. I think we all need to understand these rules better of how those funds will work, recognizing it's for about a 3-year period of time if you take those funds. So more to follow as we look at that for the future, but that's all part of Act 12. And then we had some other state revenue changes to point out, specifically child support. We saw a pretty decent increase there, roughly over $90,000. Land and water, we talked about this a little bit. Smaller decrease than we had concerns about, quite frankly. So actually it's almost nominal in terms of almost being flat, but it could have been worse. We also saw a pretty decent decrease, more than expected, in emergency management from one of our grants programs that we had offset with levy dollars. So fund balance. This is a quick snapshot of our fiscal health in Jefferson County, and some of this we presented in March of 2023. So overall, when we ended the year in 2022, we had nearly $40 million of audited funds available. So those first few bullet points is what Supervisor Jones like to call our buckets. But really, those are things that we have reserved that we know are kind of liabilities moving forward. So some of it relates to past decisions on non-spendable fund balance. We made a decision, or the board made a decision, how that looks. We sometimes have restricted accounts. So a great example is a drug forfeiture in Sheriff's Department is an easy example of a restricted account, so you can't just utilize it for anything else. But then we also look at our liability of insurance costs out there, and that's what our infamous IBNR means. It's called incurred but not recognized. And so you look at potential claims that are out there, and we get an actual assessment through the audit of what that is. And so what we do is we try to reserve that full amount, so we're covered for insurance costs going forward. So we actually had an increase of nearly $400,000 to that, and so that's an important number to understand because we're in essence reserving that as a liability. Every year that changes as we go forward. So just a number that we continue to look at. And then less assigned, that's a board action, really by resolution, and you see that's over $8 million. That's a lot of these projects we've been talking about. That's the debt payment. That's a lot of those things that we've been put aside, that we've been in conversation with the board, but it just shows up as that number. So ultimately, we get back to how the fund balance works. We have a mandatory shell of 2 months with the goal of 3 months, and based on our previous year's operational budget. So we take out bond projects, one-time grant projects to really look at if things went down, no revenue came in, and we had to pay for all our bills, what would it take for per month or 3 months, and that's what that number is. It is a very conservative number because within there are some other fund balances that we have reserved money. So example, human services, we have a first tier fund balance of roughly $650,000 set aside as we deal with things such as hospitalizations or emergency detentions, those kind of things that can cost. Example, Brent talked about today. We have a placement that costs $2,500 a day. So run it out for a month, what that cost can be. So that's some of the exposure we're trying to limit. So ultimately, we do our formula. It ends up being roughly $650,000 of unrestricted balance. But ultimately, we've already kind of built that into our budget from our resolution we passed in March. So that's just a reminder. And then we have our traditional contingency reserve of nearly $500,000. Mark was finalizing our balance this last weekend with me, and it's actually $499,000. He couldn't find a dollar to do the $500,000, but we'll get there. And then we have a vested benefit contingency of $300,000, and that kind of builds into the buckets we talked about above. So this is just reference. This is the resolution that we passed in March that talked about all those various things that we kind of put out there already related to that fund balance and other uses of working cash. One thing that we are trying to do as we work through some of these items, we did not fully utilize this in this budget. So a good example is we had almost $500,000 reserved for wage and salary adjustments going into 2024. We were able to find a way to make that work without having to use those funds. And the biggest thing goes back to one of our basic principles. If we utilize those funds, we had a structural deficit immediately of 2025 of $500,000. And so we were able to work with the team to really look at what that looks like, because otherwise we'd be finding a way to make up that difference for salaries, insurance, and all that going into 2025. So fund balance notes, this has been begun a big topic with Finance Committee, and you'll see it every so often on there, and there's not a firm path that we're going down yet. But we're really taking a pause. Should we have a greater policy conversation what our current fund balance looks like, especially as we look at other best practices that are going on across the country related to local governments. And so there's just a variety of factors as we look at this policy. Some of it is looking at the best practices. Some is understanding our bond rating agencies as we look at a new fund balance policy. What does that mean to them? I will tell you from being on calls with fund balance bond rating agencies, they just like you to keep growing that bucket. But does that make fiscal sense from a local government and operational standpoint? So we got to balance that out as we look at this. There's also more formulas that are really looking at your risk factors. Everything from in terms of what risk exposures do you have, what buckets do you have reserved in totality. So quite honestly, some of those liabilities we have reserved, if the board needed to, that's cash available in some cases. We just restrict it because we think that's a sound fiscal policy for the betterment of our policy for the county. But that totality of funds could be available minus the fact you'd have to sell some of our investments off to get the liquid cash. And ultimately, it comes down to what is the board's comfort level as we look at these conversations in the future. Built into this, too, is miscellaneous insurance cost assumptions. And this is where I begin to lose people sometimes. But just know that we have a variety of cost impacts related to our insurance that is out there. We've talked a lot about cyber liability insurance already and the new program we're going through. We expect close to a 10% increase in our liability insurance through WMIC. That pays for many of our lawsuits related to civil, to personnel issues, et cetera. And we're also looking at how we have to reserve certain accounts related to what SIR, which is a self-insured retention, and our aggregate increase for insurance payments from $500,000 to $625,000. We are looking at a different renewal as a company because we are part of that as a company, equity partner in that company to a 1 July renewal. And we're hoping with that being not 1 January, that's going to help drive some better rates for us going forward. Our workers' comp has been fairly stable, but still we're going to continue to see about an 8% increase plus our payroll increases, which are pretty significant. Property insurance, we're seeing about a 7% increase, and we expect that will go up more as we bring on the building valuation more. And in our auto physical damage, 5% increase. The hail damage is paying a role in that from a few years ago. We're paying for that now. Opioid settlement, our goal was to have probably a better solution for you all tonight as part of this process. We've been having internal and external stakeholders group meetings as we look at how to use these funds. Judge Brandmeier has been giving us some great ideas as well moving forward. But part of this, we have to understand some of the upcoming settlement agreements that we still need to finalize. So our intention is to have probably a more full budget and business plan related to the opioid settlements as part of the budget amendment process in March of 2024. There are maybe some ideas that we might bring to you before that based on some opportunities there. A big thing is how do we deal with housing as a prime example, but more to follow on that. So the next few slides are going to talk about our department structures and changes, both from personnel request, overall impacts to staff, and in some cases, we've had some changes with some of our department structures in general, specifically for 2 departments. So here's some just more moving pieces related to 3 departments. So we began the process taking what was land information and blending it to zoning and planning a few years ago and trying to really formalize that as a full merger as a department. And so one of the recommendations is to really look at the title change of that department to be planning and development. So that is a proposal that's within this budget. Folks had looked at a lot of different names across various counties, and there's a lot of different names for these departments out there. So that was potentially one. In land and water, 2 key notes. I think we talked about one already in past, and that was the intergovernmental agreement that Patricia and her team signed with the city of Watertown for some efforts they're doing up there. And so you'll see some of those revenue streams that are put in here as well. We also are shifting the lease payments for the county farm that had flowed in there, and I know there's been concerns raised as we had sold the parcel for Nestle. And I think one of the things that the finance committee and I had said is we make sure we make that department whole. So this is going to a general revenue stream, and all those revenue streams plus that were lost are now basically a reallocation of property tax as general purpose revenue. So that's what that's set up to be. And essential services, one thing that we expect going into 2024, Ryan's been a little busy with this little project going on, but really centralizing some of the things. He's been really working with Brian and Brent over Human Services as an example as we look at custodial staff and really blending those operations as we look to the future. So we expect some more changes going into that in 2025. So a big one is the court system. And there's been a lot of moving pieces here, and I think just a few slides probably won't fully tell you what's all been going on in that system right now. So the biggest thing that's been partially driving this is the fact is we're going to change how we run our courts. Currently, we have a total of 4 branches and 2 court commissioners. 2 of the branches are special. We have specialty courts. 2 are criminal, 2 are civil, and we're basically going to what's called a general tab rotation, with 3 of our branches being general courts and the 1 kind of being a special assignment court, intake court kind of thing going forward. The intention is this will be moving forward to be fully implemented in January of 2024. As part of that too, cases are already beginning to move. Clerk of courts is starting to reassign the cases to judge because criminal courts, they're already scheduling out, I was going to say booking out, but to 2024 based on the caseload that's going on. So we're having to prep for that movement going forward. We also, working with the 3rd district, had an outside consultant come in who looked at our operations, both on this proposed structure, but potentially some changes that could be made within the court support systems that we'll talk through to be a little bit more efficient there in general. So this impacts a lot. It impacts our support staff. It impacts some of the fiscal operations. You're going to see that we have some Spanish court times is something we're trying to do to maximize the use of interpreters coming in and recognizing that's a population that we need to provide better service. We're also looking at potentially how do we engage public defenders and potentially legal clinics in advance on intake Mondays to really talk through that process earlier than later, be more efficient in that process going forward. The big thing that you're going to see tonight we'll talk through is some of the support business units of the court system and how we rectify that within our budget going forward. So you're going to see how we divide clerk of courts and what we're calling court support services. And then really I have a to be determined is really dealing with our contracted attorney cost. And that's mainly because both divisions have to deal with that. And part of it is we're still working on contracts, both with criminal attorneys and our GLs, et cetera, going forward. So we want to make sure that's put in place. So this is just an example. I think this is version 80. I don't know, right, Judge? So how this is set up is actually another 3 of these plus a court commissioner block. And I see some of our staff from clerk of courts there, so they're having a good laugh of how the fund is going to be. But these are blocks scheduling by a general tab rotation by courts, and there's another one for our court commissioners. I just want to bring this up so you recognize this is not just simply, we're going to change our court system today. It's going to be really easy. There's a lot more going to it. It's not only how this is scheduled, working with the JAs for the judges, but part of it is, as an example of clerk of courts, they've been kind of specialized because of specialty courts. They're going to have to change, they're changing how they do minutes and work together and cross-train and all the other stuff is going on behind the scenes. So recognize that this is not just a simple thing that's going to be done overnight, and there's a lot of work that's gone into it already, and that'll continue going this next quarter. So currently, from a budget structure standpoint, this is how we're set up today. These are the main divisions that fall in the clerk of courts. And this is how we're going to look for the future. So under clerk of courts budget and authority will be the actual clerk of courts budget and the law library. And underneath we're going to call the court support services, which is going to be a new department basically, will be judicial support, the court commissioner's budget, family court services, and register and probate. And then on the bottom, you'll see my little comment about the attorneys, that we've got to continue to work on that between both departments and be finalized. And this is kind of a breakdown of staffing. Really the biggest change is as we look at the overall system, a slight increase of 0.5 FTE to make sure we try to get the support we need for both sides to manage the court system. I have asked everyone that we continue to have reporting back to make sure we do have the right staffs in place to support this system, because we're trying to figure out how to apply an organizational change and how it flows to a system with a lot of stakeholders. And just follow back up on that. So just so everyone's aware, we do have monthly meetings by myself, the presiding judge, Commissioner Weber, and clerk of court Homry. We try to look at the stuff going forward, so it's an ongoing process. Fair Park is the other one that we've had quite a few changes as we look at it. And these are just some of the quick bullet points why we had to look at this. So a lot of it was the fiscal status of how we were set up. In 2022, we saw some significant losses. We're projecting some significant losses going into 2023. And based on the structure and how we have our current operation, we expect the same level of losses if we stayed status quo. So these trends basically said we had to do some changes. And so we spent some time looking at various scenarios related to that with the Fair Park Committee and ultimately the Finance Committee based on staffing assessments. We do have some open policy issues that the Fair Park Committee has discussed that we will continue to look at going into 2025. And a lot of this deals with how do we fund the Fair Park, both as an asset, but also look at when you host nonprofits, county events out there and 4-H events, how do we make sure there's appropriate revenue streams or at least a recognition of that from the Fair Park operation. So there's a total of 3 scenarios that were presented to the Fair Park Committee, and many of you sat through those, so we're not going to go through them all, but this page kind of talks about the same assumptions that were in place for each one with some of the changes that were taking place related to staffing. So we had 3 scenarios for staffing. Scenario 1 is we had a recent resignation for one of our maintenance positions, so that was to not fill that role. Scenario 2 was to eliminate our operations and events role, increase the role of our current admin position to a little bit higher level, then add an additional admin support person, and then fill the open maintenance position. And the last scenario was to eliminate the operations role or unfund and then fill the open maintenance position. So ultimately, Fair Park and the Finance Committee concurred to go with scenario 2. So this ultimately had a staffing impact of unfunding that operations and event manager, effectively would be a layoff, filling a vacant maintenance position, increasing that role with the admin position, and asking for the additional admin role. Fair Week, there are some changes there structurally too. That's when we saw some where the costs were going. First, the proposal is there will not be national music acts this upcoming year. It impacts numerous line items to include security, rentals of equipment such as the stage, and just some of the special acts in general. What's being proposed to replace them at the grandstand specifically, we'd probably be looking at doing like a rodeo, monster truck show, something like that. And then having enhanced music at the tent that currently takes place. There's also, as part of this proposal, is charging for parking. I want to make sure everyone knows that. It would be charging on the north parking lot, which is enclosed. There's a corresponding expenditure to help staff that going forward. And the intention is probably looking at a certain hours when parking will be charged. So if you arrive before 4 o'clock, as an example, I don't know the time yet, that's going to be finalized, you park for free. If you come in after that time, it'd be about a $5 charge is what's being recommended. And then the committee asked us to increase sponsorship by roughly $40,000 based on what we were projecting, and that's kind of make sure that this balanced out. So those are the 2 main structure changes that we're looking at. Staffing. So in general, across the board, we are recommending what's in the budget is a 3% market adjustment in general. And we continue to do a market analysis. So you'll see in the budget, we're actually recommending that the first phase of this with more phases to come. So the market study showed several positions and some compression issues of positions that are 10% under the market value right now. And so those positions are being shown to be included within the budget, including the compression issues. Phase 2 is to look at the next grouping of staffing. So we do know we have groups of positions, roughly in the 5 to 10% outside the market of our comparable counties, that we are looking at opportunities to catch up with the implementation on 1 July. One thing that's been discussed with the HR committee is we begin to look at, we call them family of functions. As things have moved quickly in the marketplace, certain professions move quicker than others right now, and trying to make sure we have a way to adjust for that more flexible and quicker versus the overall system we have today. So more to follow. I expect that's going to be a March 2024 amendment. Terry and other HR staff are meeting with employee work groups right now as well, along with bringing a consultant on board to validate some of this data going forward. Health insurance continues to be a tough one in general, both from a county standpoint, but also for our staff. We are in our second year surcharge, which reduces it by about 20% in general. That would be reduced to 0. We're actually expecting between the reduction in surcharge and what the state has indicated, which would be roughly a 5.7 to 6% increase. We should see limited overall cost increase next year, but again, that's a projection how many years out. So I included a couple bullet points here quick. And part of this is more just some things that we saw coming out of the GIB, which is a board that oversees the insurance. So in July of this past year, they said it's going to be a 6% increase. They put it on their press releases, et cetera, right? And we started going up. This is good, right? Because we had 11% built in the budget. And we go, this can help how we operationally look and how that might help with the staff in general. But then they came back out later, and they increased the state government employees 11.8%, and then 14.6% for local governments when this is all set in stone. The other issue that we're starting to see is the tier ones across the state are being changed, and that's important because that creates the formula of what we're allowed to pay, not what we can pay, what we're allowed to pay by law. And so that has an impact and does have an impact, I shouldn't say slight, for some of our plans for employees too, because we're capped out with what we can pay. So we're going to continue to watch that going forward. And again, we're not the only county that's being impacted by that. So page 109 to 112 has all the positions that are authorized. And here are just some of the quick snapshots. I'm not going to talk through the ones that are just some minor changes. We are adding some natural resources in terms of proposal for the parks. This is coming from the Carnes Park Reserve. For planning and development, we are going to add another GIS specialist position. We are working with the city of Fort Atkinson and the city of Watertown on intergovernmental agreements that would help pay a funding source for this position. We are aware of some of our other local governments who are interested in the service. So we wanted to start small, but we think that can grow larger in terms of providing that service with a revenue source. There's also a zoning on-site water technician position that will move to more of a lead. And then you'll see some non-recommended positions at the time, but it's an asterisk because of some things before the board tonight. And then finally, in human services, some minor changes. Really with our CCS, this is really administrative specialist position to our docs and other positions to help with staffing, so just to help with that going forward. CLTS is our child long-term support system. This is one of those things we cannot have a wait list, but these are fully funded positions as well, so to help them going forward. And finally, a lot of things related to our mental health, AODA, and crisis services. So one is to add a clinic supervisor. If you look at our staffing span of control right now, we need to add another position to help take the pressure off our division leader. This is where we have the medical office assistant. We currently have one. We have a doctor, and then we have a nurse prescriber. And what we really need to do is focus their time that they're providing treatment going forward and prescribing and working through the medical conditions. And so this role is to help really with those notes and other things to take that pressure off from a functionality. Again, this will be funded mainly through insurance costs, Medicaid, and other reimbursements. And then finally, transition what we call emergency mental health intake worker to a lead position. And a lot of that's really focused on a youth crisis stabilization facility as well. So things that were not recommended at this point that were asked for. A couple positions in parks to look at going from part-time to full-time. I will tell you right now, Kevin and his team can definitely tell me and give me the data points of why they're needed. The question is how we look at funding for the future. Planning and development or zoning. So before the county board tonight are two new ordinances, stormwater and erosion control. And so part of what Matt asked for was potential position to help manage this new regulation. And so looking at other counties that have implemented, it looks like to be roughly a 0.4 to 0.6 FTE equivalent. And so partially what we're looking at is how do we fund this? So if this moves forward, we do have some various fees that we are proposed to introduce to the board that would pay for this position going forward if this does move forward. This includes actual permit fees for stormwater and erosion control. There's also current sanitary permits that the state does that the zoning department could take over to review. So you're just shifting the dollars going to state, going to Jefferson County. The thing that we've heard too is from a customer service standpoint, we'd probably be quicker than what goes on at the state from what we're hearing. And we'd basically be an agent for the state. Then the last thing is we do not charge for routine septic maintenance. So every 3 years you have to do the septic analysis. And most counties do a level of payment. So we're looking at a fee that will roughly be every 3 years. We turn in paperwork about $21, $22, give or take a little bit once that fee is finalized. So those are potential revenue streams going forward. The other thing is county clerk, county treasurer. We're looking at how do we look at those part-time and full-time positions That was just more of that wasn't a formal ask, it was more of an informal ask, but I just want to make sure everyone knows that's kind of on the radar, especially as we look at the operations of the new courthouse. So overall, we have a total staffing strength with funded positions about 672, and with that total add between full-time position increases and part-time positions decreases of roughly 7.56 is the net. So as we look at staffing needs, if you look at the strategic plan, there's a lot kind of built into that in general as we look to the future. So a lot of it's going to come down to prior-based budgeting and how we prioritize certain areas. I will have a slide later saying to manage expectations, we can't fund everything in that plan right now. We just got to be smart how we fund those objectives and move things forward. But it also is the time, talents to get the job done, and so that's going to be an important part. A lot of it's talked about in transformative governance. So we talked about doing need by department basis of staffing needs, potentially technical skill sets that are needed by each department. A lot of conversations on technology, specifically AI, and how that might change how we operate as staff. And then really review functions. There's been a lot of conversations. I'm going to use treasurers and zoning, land information as an example of how do we handle tax bills as an example, because it's a two-department operation right now. And is there better functionality as we look for that for the future? Especially because the personal property tax assessment thing has kind of changed with that thing I just talked about called Act 12. That changed, maybe some of the duties are changing on that too. And then ultimately funding. So the other part we talk about and probably don't talk enough about and things that we want to get better at is staff training. And there's things that we're working on to improve this, but this is a focus on really leadership training and how do we look at opportunities to grow your own. And so you're seeing lovely pictures for a variety of graduations from the Leadership Academy. I think Jefferson County is the #1 sponsor of sending candidates through this 8 to 9 month school. And I think most folks who have come back have said it's a very positive school. So we've had about 16 graduates. And the thing I kind of note, and you look some faces on there, 7 of those were future department heads. And so I think that's something we should really be proud of as we look at that, as we look at things, but also some great potential middle manager staff that are built in there too. We've also used like NACO training and then also Waukesha County Technical College and Madison College for leadership opportunities too. Capital. So overall, if you look at page 507, 508 is a quick snapshot, but all in, we're proposing roughly a $10.8 million capital budget for this upcoming year, including all the road projects. How the sheet kind of reads is related funding. So example is you may have grants that were funded, or like conservation and development, we have the reserve fund for farm and preservation for the PACE program. So that's kind of why we call it related funding. Some is based on budget carryover, use of fund balance, and then levy request, which is that new construction I talked to you all about. So the next few slides quickly talk about our highway projects. So the picture on the right, it's hard to see, but it's good to see purple and green because that is the amount of roads that we have gotten done in the last, from 2019 to 2023. Importantly, the work that's been done has increased our average road rating from a 5.5 to a 7 rating on the PACER scale, which is important for you all to recognize that. So in total, these last few years, we've done about 128 miles of projects. Pulverize and pave, which is a little more in-depth work on the roads, is almost 59 miles. And then a mill and pave overlay was about 70 miles. So these are the pavement ratings. This is what the highway department looks at as they look at proposals to me based on that rating. 2 is bad, 10 is great. So the more you see those light blue and green colors, that's a positive thing. This is on page 427, so you can see the rating of streets by you. Then that is utilized with how we balance funding to develop the 2024 road projects. That's on page 426. We're going to be focused on 3 main areas. The big one is County Highway K. Those who've gone down there, I think that thing's been in the works for over 30 plus years. A lot of it's become how do we do that project versus doing a full reconstruct realignment work down there. And the decision was not to do a full realignment. That's going to be roughly a $3.1 million project. We also shifted what initially was proposed to be County Highway O on the west side of the county. Based on some savings this year and the work they were doing in the Waterloo area and having an asphalt plant in the area, they just kept going because the funds were available to finish that up this year. And so they're actually going to be doing County Highway Z, County Highway H, which is down in Palmyra in that southeast corner, and also County Highway Z. So all in, well over $4 million. And just as a reminder, we do pay as we go. We have not issued debt for road projects, which we continue to be proud of, trying to keep that going. It's going to be a challenge, but we're going to keep trying to keep that going. And then here's the 5-year improvement plan. This is what's being proposed for the next 5 years. Specific going to 2025 is County Highway D. That we'll talk about in a moment and why that's important, because you see a little river runs through it. Operational capital, you're going to see a lot of slides related to that. We're not as fully funded as in past years related to operational capital, as I like to call it. You'll also see that we don't have a lot of facilities in there this year, actually none, mainly because of this project and the amount of work that's been going on at the South Campus and the Activity Center at Fair Park. That's going to come back. But the other thing that I want to make you all aware of, that we're working to look at a solution, is we have no sheriff's squad cars in this budget right now. We did a lot of investment this last year to get the take-home squad program up and running, and we feel we're all right for a little bit, but ideally we need to try to look at how do we get at least 2 to 3 cars next year. So we're going to look at potential ideas to bring back to the board next year. So again, page 507 to 508 has all the capital budgets, and we're going to quick go through these slides. How they are set up, you're going to see things that are non-levy. So a lot of this planning and development is from a fee that we get back for land development cost and what's in the budget. And then you'll also see things that are levy funded going forward. So I don't want to belabor that too much. We recognize this is the fund that we have for the farmland conservation. This is going to use funds from 2008, 2009, I think, finally, from when we sold the county farmland for the bypass, and a portion of those funds, roughly 20%, were put in this fund. And so something just as we look to the future policy conversation that should be had. So I'm going to just jump through these operational items. I'm going to quick jump to this one, planning for future large projects. So one is County Highway D project. I mentioned that we have that coming up next year. The big thing is we have a full bridge replacement that must take place. We do have a grant that funds about 80% of that cost, but our match is about $500,000. The other big thing that's going on is the final phase of the interurban Phase 3 trail. The bridge is in the budget for 2024, but the remainder of the trail being built to Oconomowoc needs to be done still. And we have about $1.4 million TAP grant, or transportation, all the alternative plan already, but we need a match of roughly $200,000 to $300,000 to complete that. Waukesha County does have a CMAQ grant to finish their side. That's for 2026. So we're looking at ideas, and this is an idea that we're beginning to pitch, but we got to talk to the broadband committee more. But potentially is, do we look at some reallocation of funds with the American Rescue Plan Act dollars, pay some of these costs now that we can reserve projects for the future. So this is not included in the budget, but it's some policy conversations to make sure we can look at freeing up dollars, but also trying to keep our commitment with broadband. And quite honestly, as we talk to some of our providers, they're gearing up for the federal funds and don't have a lot of capacity for 2024 to get projects done. And so part is how do we get these dollars out the door for needed projects. All right, forecasts and projections. We're almost there. So post-ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act dollars. The biggest thing is the plan. It's in the updated plan is in your budget book that's been recommended by the Finance Committee. Not a lot of changes, but there are some changes within there from where we were last year. Our intention is we'll have our American Rescue Plan Act dollars all out by 2024. There are provisions for contracting that can take you to 2026, but our goal is that we're done through that by then. We have some impacts, some operational costs. We do have some staff that are using American Rescue Plan Act dollars. In general, the intention was to slowly pull away from that. But there might be some priority staff within there we have to have a conversation about. Tying it to the tentative strategic plan. So you're going to see all our areas of the 4 priority areas, and we begin to tie back to that and potentially what our new brand could maybe look like. Again, that's draft, but we're just tossing it out there. But our 4 priority areas are highly regarded quality of life, intentional economic growth, transformative government, and diverse housing options. So obviously, as we lay this out, the staff has already done some work of how we look at bringing these things together and aligning the budget and the strategic plan. But a lot of it's also going to look at potentially new roles for staff, continue to look at structure and organization and skill sets needed. Look at projects. We talked through a lot of those already, but really, housing is a good example. We're looking at grants. We're looking at a revolving loan fund. We're looking at, if you did not know, Habitat for Humanity from Waukesha announced this week they're officially coming out to Jefferson County. And they're looking to be very ambitious, and they're a great group, and we've had a lot of great interaction, but there's a lot of good projects. We're looking at HUD certification, and I could go on with a lot of other departments, but that's an easy one to talk about. A lot of interesting collaborations, and that takes some patient time to have those conversations and looking at business. And really is some of our outcomes, and I think the thing I always try to point to is the healthiest communities, that designations we've gotten, because it's so broad of the metrics they use. And quite frankly, you look at the metrics they use, it ties back to many of our county departments and the work they do on a day-to-day basis. So it's a great indicator. So our next steps, besides tentative approval by the county board at our next meeting, manage expectations and really look at how do we make this all work and prioritize it. And that includes efforts related to priority-based budgeting. And we hope to kick that off fourth quarter, but it's going to be the first quarter of next year for sure. Flexibility is how we make this plan, because things will change, and work with the board on changing that forward, and continue staffing analysis. And just how do we react to change? You continue to look at various reports, and depending on which report you look at, you get different data sets. One recent one that was released from Workforce Development talks about us being the 5th fastest growing county on a percentage basis. Our post-COVID employment exceeds pre-COVID levels. So you look at the job available, we're better off than we were before COVID hit. And that's a positive thing from an economic strength, but it also means we need workforce, and that also means we need housing. That means we need services, it means we need schools, and all the things involved. We need broadband. We're definitely beginning to feel the pressures from the east and the west, and we also are seeing that with folks who have expressed interest in doing projects out here. Impacts of utilities. We talked a lot about those power generation systems for solar and liquid natural gas. And based on some leases we're seeing coming in, there's other areas in the county that are being explored, we'll say, for those things going forward. And obviously the ultimate thing is, how do we balance growth, services, our policy, and our regulation? So some quick realistic expectations. We talked a lot about state shared revenue. I know some folks aren't fully pleased, hoping we had more, or other governments, but I will also set the realistic expectation is we're set for a little bit. There's a system in place. We have a reserve fund. Don't expect that to grow significantly from a change. But our intention is we should probably look at state-focused items that we do as a county. So a great example is courts, and that's something the county's executive administrators group is saying, how do we look at that for the future to keep some more of those funds here and fully fund the court system for the work they do? Versus some of the money that goes back up to the state. Mental health is another great example of that. If you're looking at what's going on at state and federal level, there's a lot of moving pieces. And a lot of those moving pieces could impact how we operate on a day-to-day basis, whether it's fiscal policy, Supreme Court rulings related to some things ahead of us, or changes in the legislature in general. Competing for talent is going to continue to be a key challenge in how we do that, and also look at those opportunities. And the inflationary impacts are just huge. So the thing I'm going to continue to ask is some efforts for flexibility as we look at these budgets and needs for policy change for the future, especially as we deal with staff. And ultimately, you're going to see some carryover budget amendments going into 2024. It's going to be a tough year as we look at the carryover, as we think we're going to end the year up. I know as part of our things from a few years ago, we had a few $1 million because of some staffing items and some other projects didn't move forward. That's what helped with paying the debt off early. We're not going to be in that position going into this upcoming year, so we've had to be very diligent as we look at those resources. So open items for the March amendment. These are the key things that we think will be coming forward in some capacity or ongoing conversation. The opioid settlement, looking at shared vehicles. Staff classification, market analysis, phase 2, looking at appointed attorney fees. Our project match and the ARPA allocation I talked about. And then some other programs we have out there. We have what's called the LIFT program, which is a driver's license revocation program. We began this year. We have to figure out if that program works with the data. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from the system. We just got to look at how does that work and the costs related to it, and also some ideas for better pretrial diversion programs in general. So now I turn it over to you as board members. The opportunity to read the lovely budget document. Reach out to department heads, finance committee members, or just committee members who've been working on this with us. And so a key part is our budget schedule ahead. So we have our introduction today. Tomorrow morning, the full budget will be put online as well for the public to review as well. And then from tomorrow to November 6th is what we call the supervisory amendment stage. And so you do have a handout in front of you, which has a memo from me with key dates. It also has a form that we ask you to fill out if you're looking at a supervisory amendment. We can also send this out electronically, so you can do an Excel sheet. So for new members or as reminders, we do this process as a best practice. And what we ask is if you have an amendment, it gives the staff time to do fiscal analysis. You might think you're changing one line item with an amendment. You might change 10 line items with that analysis. And so our goal as staff is when we go back to Finance Committee and ultimately County Board, is a full fiscal analysis is done on that amendment. All amendments go to the Finance Committee, and they'll either receive a recommendation or a non-recommendation. All amendments still come to County Board, even if they were not recommended by the Finance Committee. And so the due date we requested, those are in my office by November 6th. That gives us about a day and a half to do some analysis. We have pushed back the Finance Committee from November 1st to November 8th, with the goal and intention of giving board members an extra week to review the budget and ask questions and make amendments they feel is necessary. Then ultimately on November 14th is the action by the County Board. So Mr. Chair, I respectfully submit the budget to the County Board for their consideration and deliberations.
Thank you, Ben. Any questions right at this moment for Ben? A lot to digest at this point. Seeing none, thank you. Takes us to committee reports, resolutions, and ordinances. First, the Finance Committee, resolution approving agreement with Premier Bank for positive pay services. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Resolution number 2023.
34.
Thank you. In 2015, the United States government began requiring all U.S. merchants to accept chip and PIN cards as a method of reducing point-of-scale credit card number theft and skimming cyber crimes. Since this time, credit card fraud has been reduced significantly, and fraudsters have turned to check fraud as an alternative, often robbing post office boxes to steal on-cash checks and alter them. Jefferson County has recently had discussions with its banking services provider, Premier Bank, regarding check fraud. One very efficient method of stopping check fraud before it happens is for the county to transmit an electronic file to its bank that lists the check number, payees, and amounts, and the bank will perform the three-way match of this information to checks that clear to determine if there are any exceptions. Upon discovering an exception, the county would be notified and have an opportunity to investigate prior to cash being withdrawn from the county's checking account. This is called positive pay, and Premier Bank has recently begun offering this product to its customers. The Finance Committee considered this resolution at its meeting on October 4, 2023, and recommended forward to the County Board to approve entering an agreement with Premier Bank for a positive pay service at the cost of $360 per year. Fiscal note, the annual cost of this service is $360 per year and will be paid for from the county treasurer's budget. No budget adjustment is necessary. Mr. Chair, I move for passage of this resolution.
Moved by Supervisor Jones. Do I have a second? Second by Supervisor Jaco. Questions? Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Resolution passes. Resolution approving agreement with Premier Bank to open a sweep account. Mr. Jones.
Resolution number 2023-35. March of 2023 saw the failure of two major banks. The contributing factor to both failures was a rising interest rate environment, which caused fixed income securities such as bonds and other fixed rate debt instruments to lose value. As customers withdrew cash, banks were forced to sell these securities at a loss in order to cover deposits. The cascading losses and resulting flight to safety of its customers caused the banks to become insolvent. Since that time, Jefferson County has engaged in discussion with Premier Bank regarding the safety of its deposit. Premier Bank offers a product whereby any funds over a target balance are swept overnight into a repurchase agreement that is fully collateralized by securities that are direct obligation of or guaranteed by the United States government. A repurchase agreement is an agreement whereby the bank agrees to repurchase the securities back from an account holder on the following business day for the cash value of the securities plus any interest earned. Opening a sweep account with Premier Bank would not only protect Jefferson County deposits in the event of a bank failure, but Jefferson County will also earn interest at the rate that is competitive with the local government investment pool currently offered by the state of Wisconsin. The Finance Committee considered this resolution at its meeting on October 4th, 2023, and recommended forwarding to the County Board to approve entering into an agreement with Premier Bank to open a sweep account. Fiscal note. Bank service fees will apply to this agreement and are based on the amount of deposits and prevailing interest rates. The interest income and bank fees will be posted to the county treasurer's budget. No budget adjustment is necessary. Mr. Chair, I move for passage of this resolution.
Moved by Supervisor Jones, second by Supervisor Johns. Questions, discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the resolution passes. Resolution denying claim for damages by Sandy Peterson. Mr. Jones.
Resolution number 2023-36. A claim has been made against Jefferson County for damages. The claim has been reviewed by the county insurance carrier WIMIC and was recommended for disallowance based on the finding that the county has no liability for this claim and is not legally responsible for the alleged damages. This resolution formally denies the claim filed against Jefferson County and directs the Corporation Council to give the claimant notice of disallowance. The Finance Committee considered this resolution on October 4th, 2023, and recommended forwarding to the County Board to deny the claim for damages by Sandy Peterson. Fiscal note, this matter has been referred to the Wisconsin Municipal Mutual Insurance Company, WIMIC, and resolved in accordance with the terms of the county policy. Mr. Chair, I move for passage of this resolution.
Moved by Supervisor Jones, second by Supervisor Jaco. Questions, discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the resolution passes. Takes us to Human Resources Committee. Ordinance repealing and recreating Personnel Ordinance HR 0690, vacation pay. That is on your purple sheet. That is this one here. Supervisor Brogler.
Ordinance number 2023-12.
12.
Repealing and recreating Personnel Ordinance HR 0690, vacation with pay. The purpose of repealing and recreating the vacation with pay ordinance is to promote employee well-being, work-life balance, and enhance recruitment and retention efforts within Jefferson County. This updated ordinance allows employees to earn more vacation with fewer years of service and incorporates suggestions and inputs from an employee work group. The Human Resource Department recognizes the need for further discussion and review regarding vacation carryover allowance and the associated financial impacts. There you have a listed summary, which is found on the next 2 pages. The Human Resource Committee considered this ordinance on Tuesday, September 26, 2023, and is recommending forward to the County Board for approval. Fiscal note, repealing and recreating this ordinance recognizes that vacation hours are part of the total hours budgeted per position, and the fiscal impact will be determined based on the manager's discretion to approve or deny vacation, which may require payment for overtime work due to employees using vacation or loss in productivity. I move for passage.
Moved by Supervisor Brogler. Do I have a second by Supervisor Turville Heights? Questions? Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the ordinance passes. Takes us to Land and Water Conservation Committee. Resolution authorizing the application and implementation of Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Clean Boats, Clean Water Grants. Supervisor Falker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I believe your mic is not working, so you have to use your outside voice, Matt.
Okay. Have the resolution number 2023-37, authorizing the application and implementation of Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Clean Boats, Clean Waters Grant. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources has a grant program called Clean Boats, Clean Waters, which funds staff to provide education to boaters regarding aquatic invasive species laws. In partnership with the town and city of Lake Mills, the Jefferson County Land and Water Conservation Department will implement this grant program on Rock Lake in 2024. The town and city of Lake Mills will provide matching funds for the program. The Land and Water Conservation Committee considered this resolution at its meeting on September 20th, 2023, and recommended forwarding to the county board for approval. Fiscal note, the total grant request is $5,550, and the total town and city of Lake Mills contribution is $1,700, which will cover summer staff costs and supplies. Land and Water Conservation Department budget will cover printing expenses. The grant amount, municipal amount, corresponding expenses are included in the 2024 budget. No budget adjustment is necessary. Mr. Chair, I move for this resolution.
Moved by Supervisor
Second.
Falker, Supervisor Christensen, second. Questions, discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution passes. Takes us to next resolution, authorizing the application and implementation of a Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Lake Monitoring Protection Network grant. Supervisor Falker.
Okay, resolution number 2023-37? 38. Oh, 38, sorry. Authorizing the application and implementation of Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Lake Monitoring and Protection Network grant. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources provides annual support to counties for lake monitoring and aquatic invasive species prevention and management activities referenced as the Lake Monitoring Protection Network grant. The amount allocated in the 2024 for Jefferson County is $13,003.36, and a grant application is required to be submitted to obtain the funds. This resolution authorizes the Jefferson County Land and Water Conservation Department to submit a grant application and supporting documents to the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources for financial assistance and comply with the requirements under the grant program. The Land and Water Conservation Committee considered this resolution at its meeting on September 20th, 23, recommended forwarding to the county board for approval. And fiscal note, the total 2024 grant award will be $13,003.36, which will cover the cost of staff time spent implementing the grant deliverables. This grant amount and corresponding expenses are included in the 2024 budget. No budget adjustment is necessary. Mr. Chair, I move for this resolution.
Moved by Supervisor Falker. Do I have a second? Second by Supervisor Kennard. Questions? Discussion? All in favor? Did you have a hand up, Cassie? No. If all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the resolution passes. Resolution authorizing the application and implementation of Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Healthy Lakes and Rivers Grant. Supervisor Falker.
Okay, I have resolution
39.
number 2023 dash, I think it's 39. Okay. Authorizing the application and implementation of a Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Healthy Lakes and Rivers Grant. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources has a grant program called Healthy Lakes and Rivers, which assists landowners with conservation practice implementation costs related to the installation of native plant, shoreland gardens, and rain gardens. These practices protect the quality of the lakes and the rivers. The Jefferson County Land and Water Conservation Department applies for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resource Funds on behalf of property owners who want to implement these conservation practices. The Land and Water Conservation Committee considered this resolution at September 20th, 2023 meeting and recommended forwarding to the county board for approval. Okay, fiscal note. The total grant request is $6,600, of which $6,000 will be partially cover the cost of implementing the practices, with the landowners covering the remaining implementation costs. The remaining $600 of the grant will offset the cost of existing Land and Water Conservation Department staff who will provide technical assistance for the project. This grant amount and the corresponding expenses are included in the 2024 budget. No budget adjustment is necessary. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I move for passing this resolution.
Moved by Supervisor Falker, second by Supervisor Turville Heights. Questions, discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the resolution passes. Takes us to item 13, Parks Committee. Resolution accepting a bid for replacement of a culvert on the interurban trail, Phase 3. Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This mic apparently works.
Yep.
I have resolution number 2023-40. The Jefferson County Parks Department is continuing construction of a multi-use recreation trail on utility right-of-way owned by We Energies. The proposed trail is 10.96 miles and is located on the former interurban rail line between City of Watertown and the City of Oconomowoc. The path cross-section will consist of a 10-foot wide asphalt surface with a 2-foot wide aggregate shoulders. The project includes 10 miles of trail within Jefferson County and 1 mile of trail in Waukesha County. The City of Watertown and the City of Oconomowoc are the project boundaries. The trail will act as an extension of the Lake Country Trail and connect to the City of Pewaukee. This project has completed 2 of 3 phases of construction consisting of 7 miles of trail. The design, engineering, and permitting on Phase 3 of this project is over 60% complete. Multiple federal and state grants have been awarded for the project totaling $1,735,665 allocated to the final phase. Jefferson County has been working directly with the We Energies Engineering Department to make sure any structures on the corridor in need of repair or replacement are completed prior to beginning of the final phase of work on the trail. 1 concrete box culvert was identified as requiring replacement before the start of the next phase of the project. This culvert is located east of the river crossing between County Highway F and Rockvale Road. Design and permitting was completed and bids were solicited with 4 vendors responding. The Parks Committee reviewed the submitted bids at its meeting on October 5th, 2023, and recommended forwarding this resolution to the Jefferson County Board of Supervisors to accept the bid of the Wanasek Corporation as the lowest responsible bidder to complete this project. On the next page, you will see a table listing all the bidders and the amounts. Fiscal note. On March 14th, 2023, the County Board of Supervisors authorized $513,182 in carryover funding for interurban trail Phase 3 seed funds. This amount currently resides in the other contingency budget line item. This resolution authorizes the finance director to move $54,900 from other contingency to the Parks Department for culvert replacement. This is a budget adjustment. County Board approval requires 2/3 vote for passage. Mr. Chairman, I move for adoption of this resolution.
Moved by Supervisor Christensen, seconded by Mr. Gulag. Questions, discussion? We'll take a roll call vote.
Supervisor Gross? Oh, I see you voted. Supervisor Fitzgerald? Yes. Supervisor Herbst?
Yes, I could read his lips.
We have 29 yes, 1 no, and 0 absent.
Thank you. The resolution passes. Item 14, Planning and Zoning Committee, report approval of positions. Supervisor Jekyll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Report to the honorable members of the Jefferson County Board of Supervisors. The Jefferson County Planning and Zoning Committee, having considered petitions to amend the official zoning map of Jefferson County, filed for public hearing held on September 21st, 2023, as required by law pursuant to Wisconsin statutes, notice thereof having been given and being duly advised of the wishes of the town boards and persons in the affected areas affected hereby makes following recommendations. Approval of petitions as listed, dated this 25th day of September 2023. Blaine Paulson, Secretary. Takes us over to ordinance number 2023-13, amending the official zoning map. Whereas Jefferson County Board of Supervisors heretofore been petitioned to amend the official zoning map of Jefferson County, and whereas petitions as listed were September 21st, 2023, and whereas the proposed amendments have been given due consideration by the Board of Supervisors in open session, now therefore be it ordained the Jefferson County Board of Supervisors does amend the official zoning map of Jefferson County as followed, and you will see them all listed. Fiscal note, passage of this ordinance has no immediate fiscal impact. I move for adoption of this ordinance.
Who's the second? Supervisor Richardson. Questions, discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the ordinance passes. Takes us to item C, ordinance construction site erosion and sediment control ordinance. Supervisor Jekyll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ordinance number 2023-14. Over the past few years, questions, inquiries, and concerns have been raised by the public and county board supervisors about the state and local regulations of agricultural operations and concentrated animal feeding operations. On July 20th, 2022, a joint meeting including Board of Health, Executive Committee, Land and Water Conservation Committee, and Planning and Zoning Committee, and Solid Waste Committee was held to discuss the siting process and regulatory framework related to concentrated animal feeding operations and other agricultural operations. A second joint meeting comprised of the same committees was held on January 30th, 2023, to discuss air, surface water, groundwater, and health concerns relating to animal operations and their regulations. One topic area discussed by the joint committee was development of an erosion control and stormwater ordinance. During the joint meeting, Land and Water Conservation Committee voted to pursue looking at implementation of erosion control measures and regulating stormwater runoff. The joint committee voted to create a work group comprised of 3 members from Land and Water Conservation Committee and 3 members from Planning and Zoning Committee. During the summer of 2023, the work group met 3 times to discuss a proposed construction site and erosion control ordinance and proposed post-construction stormwater management ordinance. On July 25th, 2023, erosion control and stormwater management work group voted to approve both ordinances and send them to the Planning and Zoning Committee for review. The draft ordinances were recommended for approval by a vote of 4-0. Both ordinances utilize Wisconsin Department of Natural Resource model ordinances for local municipality adoption and regulation. The work group had lengthy discussions on applicability sections of both ordinances and recommended changes to the model ordinances which have been incorporated into the proposed ordinances being presented to the county board for approval. Those changes in applicability requirements can be found in section 3 of the construction site erosion control and sediment control ordinance and section 4 of the post-construction stormwater management ordinance. The work group realized that need for erosion control ordinance specifically near water resources and crafted the permitting requirements to reflect this by requiring permits near waterways and wetlands. Discussion also occurred on or around section 3, parentheses 3, exemptions of the erosion control ordinance with the goal of exempting any project that obtains the following permit issued by the town building inspector if that permit includes erosion control regulations and the site is regularly maintained. The remainder of the ordinances generally follow DNR model ordinances. If approved by the County Board of Supervisors, the effective date of both ordinances would be February 1st, 2024. On August 28th, 2023, and September 25th, 2023, Planning and Zoning Committee reviewed ordinances. On September 25th, 2023, the Planning and Zoning Committee voted to approve construction site ordinance and sediment control ordinance and post-construction stormwater management ordinance and forward them both to the county board by a vote of 5-0. Mr. Chair, I move for this ordinance.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Paulson. Questions, discussion? Supervisor Turville Heights.
I don't know if this is working. No.
No,
I'll talk as loud as I can. I just had a couple quick things on here. One is for ordinance number 2023-14. I'm assuming that's a fee schedule that's at the end of it. It's not clear, it's not labeled, and I looked at it for quite a bit before I realized that's what that was representing. That would be one issue. I did have a question about whether or not there needed to be some sort of clarity about what the process to be followed was if the town building inspector isn't following the same erosion control measures as the county requires, and who determines whether or not they are following them. And then the other aspect that I was kind of worried about in here, if I can find it in my notes, is whether there should be a timeline for the cure. In section, where is it? 7, I'm sorry. Under permit requirements, question number F, it's asking 5F, permit requirements, 7.5F. It says that people have to correct a problem, but it doesn't tell them when they have to correct it, how long they have to correct it. So those were just a couple of concerns that I had with that. Thank you. Oh, and one other question, if I may, have the towns seen this at all? And do they need to have any kind of feedback on it?
Anybody would like to address her questions? Matt. Find a speaker that works.
Hello. Ooh. Your first question was on the fee schedule. We can certainly work to improve its clarity and add some titles and subtitles to make that a little bit more clear. Is kind of not so much a scramble, but one of the last things that was entered in the ordinance, and we weren't quite clear on the process at the time, so that came in last minute. But we can certainly clean that up and modify that. The town permitting process is certainly one of the aspects that the committees and work group talked a lot about. And I think one of the areas is really going to be part of the implementation is trying to identify how that's going to work the best. As we see it right now, it would fit well with the zoning permit process. A zoning permit would probably be conditioned upon obtaining that permit. Part of the reason of pushing the effective date back to February would give us some time to work with the local towns to see when they do require a permit, creating some sort of spreadsheet, key sheet for that. And then as we're reviewing zoning permits, we'll have a better understanding of, yes, this will require a permit, or the county needs to handle the erosion control permits. So there'll be a little implementation steps to work through and figure out with creating some sort of key. I think with working with luckily there's only so many towns in the county, and most of the towns a lot of the towns utilize the same company or same person for their permitting process. So that contact point to call them up quick and go, hey, do you require a permit, or do I need to do this at the county, is going to be relatively simple. But that'll be kind of that process we put together as we're permitting. Like I said, conditioning the zoning permit on obtaining that permit at the town level will certainly be one of those steps. Timeline for correcting issues. I think a lot of that would be handled under the conditions of the permit or the enforceability of the permit, but we can certainly, again, require some sort of timeline for completing them. I would suspect if there is some sort of issue identified by staff through an inspection or other means, we would require, like a normal enforcement, we're going to require that's done in a time frame. Whether it needs to be included specifically in the ordinance can be a little challenging because some issues may be more need to be resolved quicker than others. So having a firm timeline can be challenging in that sense. No, this has not gone to the towns. It does not need to go to the towns because it's not a countywide zoning. But certainly if it is approved by county board, that'll be part of the process is notifying the towns. I've had some preliminary discussions with a couple of towns and a couple of building inspectors who are aware of the process that we're going through right now.
Other questions? Supervisor Martin?
A couple of things. On page 32, under permit application review and approval, it just seems to me in a few of the spots it would be a good idea to include the words in writing. It's implied but not specified. Under A, within 30 days of the receipt of a complete permit application as required by the planning and zoning department shall inform the responsible party. I think it should be inserted there in writing whether the application and erosion and sediment control plan are approved. Section E there on page 32, to me that ought to be stricken. It says failure by the planning and zoning department to inform the responsible party of a decision within 30 days of required submittal shall be deemed to meet approval. I think we're in a little slippery area there from a legal standpoint. So I think that should be just stricken. And then this is just kind of a little, on page 34, section C, number 1, it would be a good idea for us to mirror what's in the other, in the post-construction ordinance, where it says names and addresses, and it ought to include and phone numbers of the owner and developer of the site. I have a few more, so just bear with me a minute. Again, on page 45, under waivers, section 2, the applicant shall demonstrate to the planning and zoning director that a performance standard is not achievable and at a lower level of performance is appropriate. Well, that's kind of weird wording, but what I was going to suggest is that the applicant shall demonstrate in writing to the planning and zoning director that a performance standard is not achievable. And, oh, I understand, and that a lower performance level of performance is appropriate. So again, in writing, demonstrate in writing.
Is that a different?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Which ordinance you talking about? Because some of these are in the next one.
That's, in a couple spots, I think one for each of those ordinances that refers to waters of the state, probably a good idea to cite the state statute on that. I think that's included in both of the ordinances, the proposed ordinances. And then for the post-construction ordinance, same as with the erosion control proposed ordinance. I feel like under permitting requirements, procedures, and fees, number 12, on page 59, that section about failure by the Jefferson County Planning and Zoning Director to inform the applicant, basically that it's all copacetic within 30 days shall be deemed to mean approval. I think that would be best stricken. altogether. I think that's all that I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anybody, do you have a question?
Yeah, a question, that is, are we able to talk about that second ordinance before it's been presented?
It hasn't been presented yet. No, we're talking about the first ordinance here.
That's what I wanted to check. Well, I wish you would have stopped me before I went on.
I tried. Okay. So we're still on the first ordinance here, construction site erosion sediment control ordinance. Mr. Kennard,
Yes, I got.
yours doesn't work either, so outside voice.
Yeah, I've got several questions, I guess. Has anybody looked at the economic impact this will have on the residents of Jefferson County as far as trying to comply and what the if you look at the 2,000 square foot, where this kicks in, it's 2,000 square foot. That's a less than 45 by 45 foot area. 2,025 square feet. So my wife has flower gardens that are bigger than that. And if she goes out to weed her flower garden, do I need an erosion control permit? I mean, because I'm disturbing the soil by, this agriculture is exempt, but is growing flowers agriculture, I guess. Wondering about that. And if it doesn't apply, if you have a building permit, then it's kind of like everything needs a building permit when you go to the building inspector. I believe all of them are enforcing at least the ones I deal with all the time, that have handled. What agriculture exempt, it's like, what does this apply to other than you're illegally building something? Or I guess I wonder what's the need for it.
Anybody care to address that? Mr. Jacob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was not real happy, even as committee chair and chair of the joint committee, there was a lot of stuff talked about, a lot of great ideas. The thing is, most of this is covered by the local building inspector, the townships that have them. The cities all have their own one too. So this is, basically trying to step over another smaller government and take something away from them. And I kind of felt with the whole process, it basically became, a solution in search of a problem. So I have a real hard time, supporting the rest of it. I mean, I read it and I support it in theory, but as far as going forward through with it, I think it's, we're stepping on the smaller local governments that everybody wants to say, leave the locals take care of it. And most of them that I know of follow the state ordinance or regulations on making sure that, silt fence is properly installed and taken care of when they're building stuff like that. So I guess that's my comments on it.
Mr. Zangler, you were going to get up and.
I just had two questions two comments after Supervisor Kennard's statements. The first was going to just a comparison of surrounding counties. Generally speaking, surrounding counties have a erosion control ordinance of this nature, and that fact, Jefferson County is a little behind in that time. So in the sense of, did we do an economic impact analysis of this? Not necessarily, just comparing to other surrounding communities. Jefferson County does not have it where other communities do. The town building permit process, the towns are all unique. They all have different standards and requirements for when a town permit is required. There are a lot of instances where you could be doing a 200 square foot addition on your single family home that a permit would not be required in one town, but it would be required in a different town. So there's just those differences. So when you start to talk is what kind of permits or when is a permit going to be required, those are kind of the items we'd be looking at. Each town does it differently. Some towns require permits, some towns don't require permits. The ordinance would be set up or is set up that if a town does require a permit, then the county wouldn't be getting a permit on the erosion control side of things. That's all I had at this point.
Supervisor Morris, you had your hand up first.
Well, I'm certainly not against a construction site erosion control ordinance or a post-construction stormwater ordinance. What I don't understand, and if I'm just missing this, please make it clear, so I apologize ahead of time. The original meeting was about concentrated animal feeding operations, right? At least according to this. And so a process and regulatory framework related to concentrated animal feeding operations and other agricultural operations. So if it was about feeding your animals, then is the construction site, what does the construction site have to do with feeding your animals?
Anyone care to answer that?
Good question. I'd give it a shout if you don't care. I mean, or at least from what I can see. Part of it is they wanted to, pull it into the regulations. I think, there's certain few that, basically hate concentrating, or CAFOs in the county. So they thought this would be a great way, which we all looked at it in the committees. The DNR oversees all these operations, as soon as they become big enough to be considered a concentrated feeding operation. So that's where part of that language was left out of when you get further into this, because the DNR already oversees that section of it, if I'm getting it right from what we discussed and talked about in our meeting. So that's why it's mentioned. That's where the brunt of it came, I think, in looking at this, telling us we should do something about it. So, it just kind of morphed into, or how do I want to say, was refined down to the stormwater management and runoff that way.
At a construction site,
Correct.
regardless of whether or not it had anything to do with feeding any animals.
I think so.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the work of this committee, and I appreciate the ordinance. But I'm just afraid this all ran amok. I don't understand how we had committees talking about concentrated animal feeding operations and other agricultural operations, and we ended up with an ordinance about construction site erosion, which is important, and post-construction stormwater management. So I'm not in support of an ordinance. I just really struggle with the process of how we got here. We had a committee talking about one thing and writing an ordinance that seems to be about another thing. And that's slightly disappointing.
Supervisor Christensen, you had your hand up first.
Thank you. Yeah, my comment is regarding the sense that this may be redundant or repetitive compared to what towns already have. Towns do have some of their own regulations. It's a bit of a patchwork, I believe. And I can tell you, as having served on town boards for a number of years, you're really pretty close to your neighbors when you're working with them and making rulings regarding what they need. And it is pretty handy sometimes to have a somewhat removed authority like the county, which has professional offices and a director of zoning and a director of land and water and so on, that can really spend some time researching and doing a good job compared to what towns have available to them. And I think it just, at the county level, ordinances like this give the towns the ability to have a little more backbone, or maybe deflect some of the criticism that they might get from their residents onto the county, which is a little more resistant to some of that criticism, I think. So I'd be in favor of this, even if it does have a little bit of overlap with what's out there at the towns. Thank you.
Mr. Backlund, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, a question in the footnote, it talks about, they just threw in the septic fee. Can that not be just a fee schedule and not in an ordinance? I guess, it's kind of like, it's very disjointed. Like you say, you talk about one thing, jump to another, and at the end, then, well, we'll throw a fee here on the end. It kind of almost looks like it's buried in here, and to be fair, I think it should probably be set on the fee schedule and not in an ordinance.
Mr. Waymire, want to address that?
The main issue is following our board rule, which shows a full fiscal analysis of that. And so part of that fee structure was the recognition that if this moves forward, the recommendation from the staff was we'd have to add a 1.0 FTE. And to bridge that gap, we were looking at other fees were being recommended. And so it's the full fiscal analysis. So within itself, that fee is not going to be necessarily part of this ordinance. The regulation is the ordinance. From a process standpoint, if this moves forward,
Funding stream, in other words.
it's a funding stream to help offset the cost. So if this does move forward, it would be made apart as part of a future budget amendment process. A, you'd add a position, and B, you'd add these fees as part of the fee chart from a process. But we want to make sure you all knew to move this forward, this is some of the things we were looking at as staff from a fiscal analysis.
Supervisor Turville Heights.
Yeah, I just wanted to address a couple little things. One, to piggyback a little bit on what Supervisor Christensen was talking about. At least in our case, the town building inspector does not always rule on every activity that's covered by that ordinance. So somebody who decides that they want to regrade their entire property so that all the water flows into their neighbor's property doesn't have any kind of permitting activity that they have to be involved in. And I believe that the erosion control thing does. I may be incorrect there. I'm not exactly sure why it's only the construction site from that perspective. With respect to what Supervisor Morris was asking about, I think that the way that the conversation went at the joint meeting is how that recommendation came out of there and then went into the committees and was dealt with. I think it's a little bit confusing in the way that the introduction note about it, the summary note in the beginning, ends up taking it back a long ways, and it probably takes it back further than it really has to do. It's other than at that joint meeting, that was one of the recommendations, and that we move forward with it because it is one of the things that were talked about during all that was just a lot of problems with flooding. And so out of the flooding discussion, it emerged.
Other questions, discussion? Supervisor Richardson.
I was on the committee, and I just want to note that I listened to the subject matter experts, the department heads, that really thought there was a need to bridge the gap between the towns and the county and also protect our resources, which is where I think it went from the CAFOs to the erosion, was to help protect our resources. Thank you.
Supervisor Paulson.
I may be out of line at this point, but it sounds like we got some cleaning up to do, so maybe we should take it back to committee and clean it up and bring it back.
It's an option.
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Zarling.
I'll second that if he makes.
Mr. Zarling had his hand up before the motion's made.
Yeah, just two quick things. Kind of piggybacking on what Supervisor Turville Heights said. I wonder if anybody can speak to the exemptions that would follow this permit issued by the town inspector. Particularly, I guess if anybody can speak to what an exemption might be in that case, particularly given that the that language in the executive summary is so open-ended and ambiguous, if that permit includes erosion control regulations, I guess I'd be curious what those erosion control regulations are. Are they actually stated? Are they, is there verbiage? Does it follow any other, because otherwise why have an exception if you're going to, what are these rules that would then need to be followed in the case of an exception?
Matt, would you want to address that? And then we'll go to Mr. Paulson.
Yeah, so the exemption there, theoretically, the town building inspector is going to issue a permit. We'll take a single family home. You're building a brand new home out in the town of Koshkanon. We're right next to Supervisor Jekyll. The town building inspector generally will be issuing a UDC dwelling code permit for the construction of the building. In addition, under that code are erosion control regulations. There have been instances, so in that case, you received your town permit. Your town permit has erosion control measures built into that issuance, theoretically. You would not need a county erosion control permit. There have been situations over the past couple of years that have been brought to the county staff's attention, myself, Patricia from Land and Water, of instances where situations like that have occurred and the erosion control is not being handled properly, it's not being maintained. The town building inspector or the town official is not following through on their regulations. Something lapsed, something did not happen. So we felt it was important to not double dip into the town or into the landowner or contractor to get two permits, but we also wanted to have some flexibility to be able to step in and handle situations where there are issues and the local official is not handling those issues and we're resulting in some runoff into a waterway.
Okay, Supervisor Paulson.
I made the motion, not
Oh,
made the motion that we send this back to committee, let them clean it up, and I'll second that.
we have a second by Supervisor Morris. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Seeing none, we'll go back to committee. Takes us to item D, ordinance post-construction stormwater management ordinance. Mr. Jekyll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gotta get my cheaters back out. Right. So most of this one here, this would be ordinance number, I got it written down, let me get to the right page. Come on.
15.
Ordinance number 15, post-construction stormwater management ordinance. The first paragraph is basically all the same. So during the joint meeting, the Land and Water Conservation Committee voted to pursue looking into the implementation of erosion control measures and regulating stormwater runoff. The joint committee voted to create a work group. That's actually the same exact all the way through to the bottom. So both ordinances are the same. And the discussion and everything was the same. Actually, it's pretty much word for word all the way through till the fiscal note. Come on. Okay, those changes in applicability requirements can be found in section 3 of the site erosion and sediment control ordinance and section 4 of the post-construction stormwater management ordinance. That's the difference in the executive summary. Fiscal note, the FTE required to implement both ordinances is approximately 0.5 FTE based on the estimated number of permits Actually, I didn't read it on the first one. I'll finish reading it out on this one. The estimated number of permits and staff time required for effective implementation, a 1.0 FTE with Planning and Zoning Department is being requested for enforcement of this ordinance. Permit fees revenue associated with both ordinances is estimated to be $30,625 and would be addressed as provided below. Should the ordinance pass, a budget amendment to the 2024 budget would be requested after the 2024 budget is passed November 14th, 2023, to provide the resources to enforce the ordinance. Additional revenues have been identified within the Planning and Zoning Department to offset this increase in FTE. 3-year septic maintenance fee. The Planning and Zoning Department currently implements a 3-year septic maintenance fee program under Wisconsin State Chapter number 14525. The department proposes to charge owners a septic system fee. This estimated revenue of this fee is $75,000 annually. The Planning and Zoning Department proposes to become an agent for the Department of Safety and Professional Services, DPS, for the review and issuance of certain septic system permits. Currently, the certain septic system permits are required to obtain permit from the DPS and the county. This proposal would allow the county to review and issue the permit on behalf of the state. The estimated FTE to implement this service is 0.2 FTE and is estimated revenue of $20,000. Mr. Chair, I would move for adoption of this, except for the same kind of reasons. I agree with a couple of the other supervisors. You know, we're looking for a funding source for one or two or part-time individual to create this. So we're grabbing at straws to find funding. I don't like that idea myself. So I would almost like to refer this back to committee.
I'll second that.
So there was 2 motions made here. One was to bring this to the floor, and now a second one is to, first of all, we got a motion on the one to bring this to the floor.
Okay.
Unless you're withdrawing that motion.
I'll leave it up there being we printed all the paper for it.
Do I have a second to bring it to the floor? Supervisor Christensen. Okay, discussion on this ordinance. Supervisor Turville Heights.
Thank you. One issue that I did identify in here in conversation with, for example, Laura Payne, was that this is listing for peak discharge in the section 11 performance standards for sub B peak discharge, that it's based on a 1 and 2 year 24-hour event, which is not very much. But she had recommended a 25-year event, which is about 4.5 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, which has happened several times in the last 10 years alone. So designing something for only an inch of rain in a 24-hour period might not be sufficient. It also doesn't appear to address some of the structure of stormwater management systems, such as how much a culvert can hold or retaining ponds can hold. So I would recommend that if this is further discussed or taken back to committee, that those kinds of details be ironed out a little bit more efficiently.
Supervisor Morris.
Without diminishing anything that was just said, I want to make that clear. We had a motion, and then with that, he said he'd like to refer this back to committee. Doesn't a motion to refer?
No, right now we're
supersede
just,
the session?
this is on the floor now
Right,
for discussion.
right. I'm not saying that it's not. But then he also said that there was a motion, he also said he thought it should go back to committee. Doesn't a motion to refer back to committee supersede discussion?
Because he made the motion to put it on the floor first. And then he withdrew the motion to remove it back to committee till after the
I
discussion.
think the one he said should go forward is the motion that you asked for, but if he's making and if he was the committee chair and he's making the motion to refer to the committee, to refer back the committee, shouldn't we follow the committee chairs?
I did. And his first motion was to put it on the floor. Do you want to clarify that, Mr. Jaco?
No, that is fine. That's the way I understood what you were asking, which motion I wanted. So, like I said, the paperwork was all printed. Everybody's had a chance to look at it. Or maybe not long and hard enough, but that's why I had, second guessed it to go back, but I thought it deserved discussion first.
Well, I will interject. This is my opinion. I'd like to have the discussion so people that have concerns, and if it does go back to committee, we hear what they are. So Supervisor Backlund, you had your hand up.
I was just gonna make a motion to refer back to the committee.
Oh, any other further discussion on what's on the floor here so that we can, if it goes back to committee, they can address your concerns?
Do we have a second?
Okay, then I'll now ask for a second since there's no further discussion on the motion that was on the floor. So now we have a motion to refer back to committee on the floor, and that's a second for that, Supervisor Christensen? Is that what?
Asking if we had a second, I didn't hear anybody
Oh,
say it.
so it's a second by Supervisor Drainer to move it back to committee. Any further discussion? Supervisor Christensen.
This question is probably for Matt. If this is referred back then to committee, there was a date of February 1st for effectiveness. Will that still be available? Probably, right? Yeah.
Possibly, depends on how long it stays in committee.
Thank you.
Can I quickly interject, Mr. Chair?
Sure, certainly.
So Matt and I talked a little bit about the start date. I think part of it was trying to figure out what the construction date might be. But then there's also going to be the reality of, do we have the skill sets in place to take on the task? So the only reason I say that is, let's say it's another month to 2 months and we move forward, then we move forward with the authorization to create a position. That's not a lot of time, quite frankly, to have a person in place prepped up to say we're going to say 1 February. Not saying it can't happen. I just want to make sure we also manage the expectation of overnight having someone available in 30 to 60 days. We might get lucky. I'm just saying we have to understand that we have authorization for the position, and then we have the posting, and then you have to move forward with the hiring process and then bring someone on and onboard them. So that's my only comment I'll make on that.
Thank you.
So I have a motion to refer this back to committee. Any discussion on that? Seeing none? All in favor? Excuse me, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Excuse me. It's referred back to committee. Okay. Appointments by the county administration. Mr. Waymire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. By virtue of the authorities vested in me under section 59.18, parent 2, parent B of the Wisconsin State Statutes, I respectfully request confirmation of the following appointments. Mr. Russell Kreutz to the Human Services Board for a 3-year term ending November 1st, 2026. Mr. Kirk Lund to the Human Services Board for a 3-year term ending November 1st, 2026. Art Burmeyer to the Jefferson County Library Board for a 3-year term ending December 31st, 2026. Art Burmeyer to the Bridges Federated Library System Board for a 3-year term ending December 31st, 2026. Greg Hosh to the Jefferson County Library Board for a 3-year term ending December 31st, 2026. Joseph Naylor to the Veteran Service Commission for the 3-year term ending December 14th, 2026, and Mr. Jim Seidel to the Veteran Service Commission for the 3-year term ending December 14th, 2026. I respectfully request confirmation of these appointments.
So moved.
So moved by Supervisor Brogler, a second by Supervisor Backlund. Any questions, discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, they are confirmed. Public comment, I have 2 people. I have public comment of a general nature, something not on the agenda. I have Supervisor Martin. And then Supervisor Jeff Johns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Could you go to a mic?
Let me try. Behind you.
Mine work. Or you can come up front here too.
Does this work? Oh, yes, it does. Hello. Okay. This is a quick update on what's happening with avian influenza in the United States. Last week, two commercial turkey facilities in South Dakota were hit with the same virus that we had last year. The locations are less than 600 miles from here. The outbreak impacted more than 145,000 birds. Last week, also, a commercial poultry operation in Utah was hit, resulting in infecting 140,000 birds. Elsewhere, over the last week, 2 people in Cambodia died from the H5N1 virus infection, a 50-year-old person and a 2-year-old child. The bird flu has been rearing its ugly head again with the fall migration of birds. Last week, in addition to those developments, the CDC updated its technical report on the H5N1 bird flu virus. It pointed out that the risks to the general public remain low. However, people who have job-related exposure to infected birds or recreational exposure to infected birds, which I'm assuming they mean hunting, may be at higher risk. It seems for a variety of reasons, which in the interest of time, we won't be discussing here tonight, it would be prudent for us to consider the formation of an ad hoc special committee on avian influenza. There are things we can do now to help reduce risks for our farm workers, our livestock producers, and our communities as a whole. There are steps we can take now to be better prepared to respond to an outbreak than we were in 2002. There are actions which would not require approval by state or federal agencies. Let's take the lessons learned from the last 2 bird flu outbreaks last year and do better. Please, everyone, think about this. Let's be proactive and help pave the way for a better and faster response if and when, I hate to say when, but if and when avian flu strikes Jefferson County again. We really owe this to our constituents. Thank you.
Supervisor Johns.
Works. So, last thing on the agenda, I guess. From the Solid Waste Committee, we are hosting an electronics and appliance recycling event at the Fair Park on October 21st from 8 until 11 a.m. This includes, as you can imagine, for everything from refrigerators to computers to television. So, pass the news along to your constituents and the folks in your areas. We have a company that is marketing this program. They're the one that run it, and they do it for a fee from the people that bring appliances in. So it's the more people we get in, the more this company benefits, and then we all benefit, as opposed to finding things along the side of the road. So that is it. October 21st, 8 to 11. Thank you.
I would list that under announcements rather than public comment.
Right.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Yes, you may.
Will that be like put out on Facebook or something so that it's easier for us to share?
It is.
Or
Yeah.
Okay, because I hadn't seen it, so I didn't know if it was like going out or it had gone.
Okay. I'll let you know. So, Matt, did we get that out there? Yeah.
I saw another hand up out there, but I didn't catch it. Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to thank Supervisor Turville Heights for an excellent Lake Ripley Management District report.
Thank you very much. Any other announcements? I just want to remind folks that you have this sheet from Mr. Waymeyer so you can deal with the budget amendments if possible and what the budget process is. Please read it, and if you have any amendment suggestions, get them in on time. Secondly, a reminder that we have a second meeting in October, the budget hearing on October 24th, 2023, and over the years that has become kind of an ad hoc pickup for some items that sometimes we need to get done to keep the November meeting a little bit lighter. So just a reminder, we have another meeting yet this month. Any other announcements? Mr. Waymire, any announcements?
No, I think the only other big thing for announcements for next month is the plan is to bring the strategic plan forward for approval as well. So just, that should be on your horizon too.
With that, no other announcement, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved by Ms. Supervisor Heights, and second by Supervisor Gulig. This is not debatable. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, we're adjourned.